I think Nintendo has a serious problem with the Switch, if you couldn't tell from the title of the video. So Nintendo have not announced, by the time of this video, a new Nintendo Direct for this year, meaning it's been like 162 days or something since the last Direct, and I find that to be an issue. But that's not the issue we necessarily have with the Switch. So the Nintendo Direct shows us our new games for 2020. Right now, 2020 is looking a bit bare bones. We've got Animal Crossing New Horizons, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, No More Heroes 3, and Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. And I don't think that's a fantastic lineup. I'm very excited for Animal Crossing, but it was a delayed game. No More Heroes 3 seems really niche. Mystery Dungeon's a remake, Xenoblade is a port. So that's 4 games that are all kind of have their own little excuses as to why they're not really the most optimal games. I'm still excited for Animal Crossing, don't get me wrong, but it's just not the best lineup. And not having a Nintendo Direct by now is really, really bizarre to me. And I know that Nintendo fans aren't entitled to get a Nintendo Direct, but at the same time, if they want to express their disappointment for not getting a Direct yet, then they are totally in their right to do so. They are the consumers buying your products, Nintendo. They are very fair to critique that. Why aren't we getting new games? What's happened to your release schedule? And right there is where my issue lies. Nintendo's release schedule is whack as hell. So last year, 2019, the first half of that year was absolutely miserable. Miserable. We got one big game for the first 6 months, and that was Yoshi's Crafted World. Mario Maker technically released in the first half as well, but it was near the end of June, so it was basically the second half, at least that's what it felt like. It was the last part of June where we got Mario Maker 2, so it just felt like it wasn't really a first half game. So all we had to carry us over was Yoshi's Crafted World. That's not particularly great. It's not that big million system seller. It's another 2D platformer, and I know that's very subjective, but it can't be something that holds your entire schedule for half a year, and that is a problem. The second half had a good lineup of games, I'm not complaining about that, though a lot of them weren't for me, like Fire Emblem 3 Houses, or Astral Chain, or Luigi's Mansion 3. I wasn't particularly too excited for these games, but at the same time, a lot of people were, so I was happy for them. It was a good release schedule, but why didn't they space that out properly? Number one, we could have had a game every 2 months if they just started releasing those games at the first half of the year, instead of giving us absolutely nothing, making the Switch feel completely empty and dry in the first half of the year, and then the second half is where we get our whole bunch of games. Why does it have to be like that? And now I'm worried that that same thing is going to happen again for 2020. Right now, we don't really know of anything coming out this year. Animal Crossing comes out in March, so does Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. Cool, that's 2 games. I really don't think Mystery Dungeon is that big of a deal considering it's just a remake, but it really does make me feel like that the only reason they delayed Animal Crossing wasn't for quality assurance, it wasn't to make the game better, it was to simply have a game for the first half of 2020. And I think that's a lame, lackluster tactic to go with. I feel like if a game is finished, release it when you can, rather than just holding out because you can. Here's the thing, and I know this is controversial. It feels like right now, Nintendo are a bit full of themselves. And I know that sounds really pessimistic, but what I mean by that is when the Wii released, the Nintendo Wii, a bloody hugely selling console, Nintendo thought they were hot shit. They thought they could release any game at any time. It wouldn't matter because they're Nintendo, they can do their own thing. And guess what? It backfired with the Wii U. That completely backfired. One of the lowest selling consoles ever. And it wasn't a great time to be a Nintendo fan if you only owned the Wii U. It felt like they were full of themselves. They were following their own rules. Now it kind of feels like they're doing that again. It feels like, oh, it doesn't matter, we're Nintendo, we don't need to release games, despite the fact that we're a gaming company solely made to make games. Nah, we'll just leave 4 months since the last release being Pokemon Sword and Shield for the next major release. 4 months. 4 for a new game of any kind from Nintendo. 4 months. In January, we had Tokyo Mirage Sessions. That was a port of a niche game on the Wii U, and now we're here. That is just abysmal. I'm sorry, that's abysmal. That's why when I go ahead and play the Switch, it does feel a bit empty to me, because it just doesn't feel like there's a lot of Nintendo games coming out. And I know there's third-party games, but honestly, half the third-party games I see are just games of old releases rather than new releases. Like The Outer Worlds is an old game by now. That comes out soon, and Nintendo have this release schedule thingy where it's like, oh, we've got so many games, look at this and this and this. But it's either games that have already been out on other consoles, or it's DLC. And that's not really exciting. Not as much as a new game, at least. Like, they put the Fighters Pass for Smash Part 2 on there when we don't know any of the characters. Really? That's one of your big releases? I don't feel like this is an entitlement. I think this is just consumers wanting games. I think Nintendo shouldn't really be doing these massive gap thingies. They should have a steady stream of games. What I think is a fair release schedule, and I think this is very fair, considering Nintendo are the company solely made to make games and they have millions of teams under their belt. One new game every 2 months should not be a lot to ask for. I'm sorry, it shouldn't. I don't even think one game a month is too much to ask for, but I am willing to set that aside. One game every 2 months feels fair to me, but that is just not what we're getting at all. We are lucky if we get a new game every 3 months, and that just shocks me because the 3DS had such a great release schedule. We got games constantly, all the time on the 3DS. And now, when they only have one console, we only get one game every few months. Why? Why? What happened to Nintendo's development teams? They used to have so many. So many games came out when they had the Wii U and the 3DS to balance. They had so much stuff going for them. What happened between the Wii U and 3DS era and the Switch era, where we just don't get games? Even the first half of 2017 had this issue as well. The Switch released with one game being Breath of the Wild, and we had to wait till the end of April for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, a port, and then we had to wait a month after that for ARMS. It was a massive gap when it first came out, and I was just appalled at, really? Nintendo released it with this? They got away with it because Breath of the Wild is like a masterpiece game and it was huge. But I think this has been a reoccurring issue for the entirety of the Switch. 2018 is probably the worst year I can remember for Nintendo. I think I prefer 2016 because at least we had Wii U and 3DS games, whereas 2018 for Nintendo on the Switch was just shockingly poor. First half of the year, what did we have? Kirby Star Allies, Mario Tennis Aces. Kirby Star Allies, the, in my opinion, really unambitious game, and Mario Tennis Aces, the absolutely empty, lackluster game, with a really misleading story mode that was just not big at all. And then the second half of the year, they relied entirely on Smash. The whole thing was entirely Smash. That was it. And it was just the most unfun time to be a Nintendo fan. I hated being a Nintendo fan there because it felt like I was doing nothing but being negative. But every decision they came up with was just bad. And then Nintendo Switch Online as well was just the icing on the cake of terribleness. I just couldn't stand it. And then 2019 comes, and we got a Nintendo Direct in February, and my hopes are looking up because we got Mario Maker and Link's Awakening. And I'm like, okay, fair enough. But then I quickly realized that there's no games coming out for the first half of the year. There's nothing. There's just flat out nothing. It never used to be like that. On the 3DS, it was never like that. I don't get it. Logically, I do not understand. Nintendo have combined their development teams for the Switch. They only have one console to worry about, and they still can't get a solid, consistent release schedule. How does that make sense? I don't really understand that whatsoever. Where are the games? And I know that sounds, oh, Nintendo Switch has games. It sure does. But we shouldn't be waiting 4 months for a new one. That's insane. That is a whole third of the year. A third of a year without any games. A third. That's so bad. I'm sorry. That is not acceptable for a company that only make games. It's just shockingly poor. And I'm just making this video to just make you all aware, I guess. Because I know with the heavy stream of games of the last half of last year that it may seem like Nintendo's doing fine. But I don't feel like they can do this forever. I think one day this is just gonna bite them in the ass, where consumers are gonna be asking where the games are because they're just not releasing them consistently. We know nothing. We've got Bravely Default 2, which I would argue is also kind of a niche game, but it's still cool. Like, if there's a new game every month, and one month it's a niche game, the other month it's a big game, one month it's a port, I guess, and the other month it's a big game. Fair enough, that is a fine release schedule for me. But if it's every 2 months, and it's either a port or a niche game every 2 months, that is not a good schedule. They have so many franchises under their belt. Where are they? Seriously, where are they? I think it's a huge problem. I don't think it's a problem many other consoles had. The Wii U is the closest thing I can think of having this issue. And that is the console everyone proclaimed as dead when it was released because there weren't many games coming out. But it feels like the release schedule of that and the Switch is the same. And that just really confuses me. I hope I didn't sound super disrespectful in this video, but as a consumer, as a Nintendo fan who has bought their system, I'm just waiting for the next games. And I think it's fair to say that most people buy Nintendo consoles for Nintendo games rather than the third-party games, because we always get the worst versions of those games. They're always got the limited amount of graphics as possible, and they always run the worst. But the only advantage now is that they're portable, so fair enough. But I would still say they're the worst versions of each game for the most part, because I know Dragon Quest XI is probably the best version. But nobody buys a Switch for that, I don't feel like. Is that fair to say? Is that fair to say? And I'm going to do it right now. Guys, let me know in the comments below, because I do like being persuaded on these things. What do you think? Do you think I'm totally full of shit? Do you think I'm just trying to make up BS for the sake of it? Or do you think Nintendo's release schedule is perfect? Let me know. I do want to know. Please. I don't want to just be this spoiled brat. I want to be a fair, critical person. I want to actually give Nintendo valid criticisms in hopes of someday them seeing it and improving upon it. So if you think I'm being disrespectful, if you think I'm being unfair, unjustified, invalid, please let me know in the comments. I'll be reading the comments and I'll try and take in your arguments if I agree with you, for sure. So with all that said, that's it. I like the community. I like the interactivity. So get down in the comments below right now and tell me why I'm wrong. Thank you.